Thanksgiving is supposed to be a time when families come together, right? It's all about the warm feelings, the laughter, the food, the gratitude. Or at least, that's how it's sold to us in movies, commercials, and the expectations we grow up with. It's meant to be a day where we put aside all the petty problems and celebrate what we have, as a family. For years, I bought into that idea. I was always the good son, the one who kept things together, who kept my head down and did what was expected of me. But last year was the turning point. It wasn't about love or gratitude or family for me. No, it was about expectations, and how, when those expectations weren't met, my family showed me exactly what they really thought of me. For as long as I could remember, I was the one everyone turned to for support. My parents, my sister, they all counted on me. I helped pay the bills, bought groceries, chipped in on the mortgage when they asked, no questions. I told myself it was what family did for each other. But deep down, I began to wonder, when does it stop being a favor and start becoming an obligation? I worked hard, put in long hours at my job, and slowly watched my paychecks disappear, one bill at a time. It didn't bother me at first. I knew my family needed it, or at least, that's what I told myself. But over time, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. And last year, Thanksgiving served as the cruel reminder. As I walked into the house that day, expecting to at least get a thank you for everything I'd done, I didn't know that it would be the day I would learn just how transactional my family's love really was. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there, but I chose to ignore them. You know how it is. When you're in a situation, it's hard to see it for what it truly is. You make excuses for people you love, thinking they're just struggling or that you owe them something. But in reality, I was doing more than just helping out. I was being used, and I was too blind to realize it. I had always been the responsible one. My younger sister, Sarah, well, she was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who lived in her own world, pursuing whatever dream caught her attention that week. But she never had to worry about money, never had to work too hard to make ends meet. My parents, they were always there for her, or at least that's what they told her. They loved her unconditionally, they said. They supported her dreams and passions, no matter how impractical they were. And me? I was the one who had to grow up. I was the one who had to be responsible, who had to shoulder the burden of the bills, the rent, the groceries. When I got my first paycheck, the subtle hints started. My mom would casually mention how expensive the electricity bill was this month, or how grocery prices were sky high. It was always in passing, but I knew exactly what she was doing. She was fishing, and I, being the dutiful son, didn't think twice. I contributed. At first, it was just a little here and there. But slowly, the amount started to grow. It wasn't just groceries anymore. It was utilities. Then I was covering part of the mortgage. And when they needed money for one of their endless home improvement projects, yeah, I was there too. It didn't seem too bad at first. I wanted to help. I was living at home after college, trying to save up some money. But over time, it became clear that I was doing more than just chipping in. I was carrying the weight of the house. And what did I get in return? Guilt trips. Guilt trips whenever I questioned whether I could keep up with it. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us? That was their go-to line. It was a guilt I couldn't shake. How could I not help? They were my parents, after all. They'd sacrificed so much to raise me and Sarah, or at least, that's what they kept reminding me. But it never felt like enough. No matter how much I gave, it was always not enough. It didn't matter that I was working full-time, juggling my own bills, trying to figure out how to save for my future. No, what mattered was that I wasn't contributing enough to their bottom line. My parents needed more. They always needed more. And as for Sarah, she was never asked to contribute. No, Sarah was special. She was creative and still finding herself, so she got a free pass. She flitted from one hobby to the next, never worrying about finances. My parents funded her lifestyle without a second thought. Meanwhile, I was the one who had to make the sacrifices. I was the one who had to be the adult. The resentment started to build, little by little. I couldn't help it. Every time I gave another $100 or paid for a bill, I felt a little bit more like I was being taken for granted. But what could I do? It was Thanksgiving after all, the season of giving. That's when families are supposed to come together, right? I thought maybe this year would be different. I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would see all that I was doing and at least acknowledge it. After all, they had raised me to be this responsible adult. Wouldn't they appreciate my efforts? I should have known better. Thanksgiving morning felt different. Maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier in the house, or maybe it was just me. But as I walked into the kitchen to help Mom with the usual meal prep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The smells of turkey and pies filled the air, the sounds of pots and pans clanging against each other as Mom moved around the kitchen in her usual frantic state. Dad was in the living room, glued to the TV, and Sarah, well, she was busy taking selfies in the corner as usual. It was the same old chaotic Thanksgiving morning. But then, as I chopped vegetables alongside Mom, I noticed something. She was chopping with more force than necessary, her movements sharper, more erratic. Her face was tight, and when I asked if everything was okay, she didn't answer right away. She sighed dramatically, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "Everything's fine, Michael," she finally said, but there was an edge to her voice that made me uneasy. "We were just talking," she continued, in a tone I knew all too well. "Your father and I were just talking." Oh God. Talking was the usual precursor to some new financial request, or worse, a guilt trip. I braced myself. "What about?" Mom turned to me then, looking me dead in the eye. "We were just saying how grateful we are to have you here, helping out." She trailed off, but I could already tell where this was going. The words felt empty, rehearsed. I waited silently for the other shoe to drop. She sighed again, this time with more annoyance than exhaustion. "But, your contribution lately has been a little lacking." Lacking? I couldn't believe it. I blinked, not quite able to process what I was hearing. Lacking? "Mom, I just paid the electric bill, and I gave you extra for groceries this month." She waved her hand dismissively, as if my words didn't even matter. "That's nice, dear, but we're talking about the bigger picture. We've sacrificed so much to raise you. College, food, clothes, everything. And frankly, what you give us now, it's just not really enough to show for it." My jaw tightened. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Not enough? Mom, I give you almost half my paycheck every month. What more do you want from me?" She scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Half? Please. After taxes and everything, it's probably more like a third. And think about everything we've done for you." I could feel my blood pressure rising. This was it, the breaking point, the line that they always crossed, but this time, it was too much. "I'm not saying you didn't do anything for me," I said, struggling to keep my tone level. "But I'm an adult now. I'm contributing. What exactly is enough for you?" Before she could respond, Dad walked into the kitchen. Of course, he was drawn in by the raised voices. His expression was a mix of confusion and irritation. "What's going on?" he asked, folding his arms across his chest like some kind of enforcer. Mom immediately launched into her version of events. "He's saying it's enough support," she exaggerated. "Can you believe it?" Dad scowled at me, his face reddening. "Michael, we expect a little more gratitude. This is Thanksgiving, for goodness sake. We just want to feel appreciated." I stared at him in disbelief. Appreciated? I'd been busting my ass for years, and this was what I got in return? "Appreciated?" I repeated, my voice growing louder. "After I've been bankrolling you for years, this is how you show your appreciation? You're telling me my support is lacking on Thanksgiving Day?" "Don't get smart with us, young man," Dad barked. "We're your parents. You owe us respect." Respect? I was about to lose it. "Respect is a two-way street, Dad," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "And right now, I'm not feeling much of it from you." That's when Mom, without hesitation, stepped closer to me, her eyes narrowing with something cold. "You know what, Michael? If you feel that way, maybe you should just leave." My blood ran cold. I thought I must have misheard her. "Excuse me?" I stammered. "You heard me," she snapped. "If you're going to be ungrateful and complain about helping your own parents, then maybe you should just find somewhere else to be. Consider this our thanks for your little support." I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted me to leave, on Thanksgiving, of all days. And Sarah. She was standing off to the side, a smug smile on her face, actually giggling. Giggles. As if this was some kind of joke. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find the words. The reality of the situation hit me all at once. Years of resentment, years of feeling used, and now, this. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A cold calm washed over me. I looked at my parents, at Sarah, and realized I had been nothing but an ATM for them. "You know what?" I said, surprising even myself. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should leave." They exchanged a look, probably thinking I was bluffing. "Really? Where are you going to go?" Dad sneered, clearly thinking I couldn't afford to leave. "It doesn't matter," I said, walking past them toward my room. But one thing's for sure, I'm done paying for everything. I could hear them laughing as I packed my essentials into my backpack. I didn't even stop to argue with them. They called me names, laughed, told me I'd be back by dinner, begging to come home. But I didn't care. This time, I meant it. I walked out that door, leaving behind everything and everyone who had held me back for so long. I didn't have a plan when I left. Honestly, I didn't even know where I was going to go. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had to get out. The weight that had been hanging around my shoulders for so long, the guilt, the pressure, the constant sense of obligation. It was gone. And as I walked away from that house, there was a strange sense of freedom that I hadn't realized I needed so badly. I walked down the street, my backpack slung over my shoulder, and tried to figure out my next move. The cold air bit at my face, but I barely noticed. My mind was still racing from the argument. My parents had always made me feel like I was failing them, like no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. But today, I was done. I pulled out my phone and called my friend David. We'd been friends since college, but we hadn't really hung out much lately. I didn't know if he'd be home, but he was my best shot at not spending the night on the streets. Luckily, he picked up. "Yo, what's up?" His voice was casual, but I could hear the confusion in it. "Where are you?" I took a deep breath. "I need a place to stay, man." "Whoa, what happened?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I just left my parents' house," I said, the words feeling strange coming out of my mouth. "I need to get away from them. Can I crash at your place for a bit?" David didn't hesitate. "Dude, of course. Come over. I've got a spare room. Just come by when you can." Relief washed over me, and I felt a small weight lift off my chest. David had always been there for me. He wasn't going to judge me or make me feel like I'd done something wrong. I made my way to his apartment, which was a little far from my parents' place, but it didn't matter. The fact that I wasn't heading back to that toxic environment was enough. When I got to his building, I felt like I was entering a whole new world, one where I didn't have to be anyone's ATM or play by anyone's rules. David's apartment was small but cozy. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was quiet, and it was mine, at least for the moment. I collapsed onto the couch after he showed me to the spare room. David made us turkey sandwiches from leftovers, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. "Man, what happened? You just walked out on them?" David asked as we sat down to eat. I nodded, barely able to look him in the eye. "Yeah, they kicked me out and I just left. I'm done." David raised an eyebrow. "They kicked you out?" "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "It was Thanksgiving. I've been paying their bills for years, but it's never been enough for them. They just keep asking for more. And then today, they told me it wasn't enough and actually told me to leave, on Thanksgiving, like that was some kind of lesson they were teaching me." David's eyes widened in disbelief. "Dude, that's messed up." "I know," I said, shaking my head. "I just couldn't take it anymore. I was sick of being treated like their personal ATM. I've been helping them with bills, groceries, even the mortgage, and all they do is complain." We sat in silence for a while as I processed everything. David just listened, not interrupting, letting me talk it out. It felt good, honestly, to finally get all of this off my chest. The next few weeks were a blur. The first few days felt like I was floating in some kind of dream. I didn't have to worry about the next bill, the next argument, or the next emergency that would drag me back into my parents' world. I had money in my account for the first time in years. I was finally free to think about my future, to think about my own goals and not be consumed by the constant pressure of meeting someone else's expectations. But there was also a lingering sadness, a disappointment that weighed on me. I had spent years trying to be the good son, the responsible one, but I had never felt like it was enough. And now, I was seeing just how badly I had been used. My parents' sense of entitlement, their disregard for me as a person, was becoming clearer every day. And Sarah, she wasn't any better. She had barely worked a day in her life, yet my parents would bend over backward for her. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But now, with me gone, they were starting to feel the weight of their financial decisions. And Sarah? She was still living at home, expecting everything to be handed to her, even though her little passion projects weren't exactly paying the bills. I didn't have much contact with my parents in the weeks that followed. And honestly, I was okay with that. I needed the space. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of their expectations. But then, a month later, something unexpected happened. It had been a month since I walked out. A month since I had cut ties with everything I had known. everything that had been my life for so long. The relief I felt in those early days had started to blend into something else, a kind of quiet uncertainty. I was okay. I was surviving. But the realization that I had been on my own for a month was slowly sinking in. I had been busy, focusing on work and settling into life at David's place. I was reconnecting with friends I hadn't had time for, getting out of my shell, and even starting to make plans for my future. But there was always a part of me that had lingering doubts. Would they come after me? Would they try to get me back? Guilt trip me into returning? The thought nagged at me, but I had forced myself to stop worrying about it. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let them pull me back into their financial mess and their toxic transactional love. But then, one evening, everything changed. I was sitting at David's kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee and scrolling through my phone, when he came in, holding his phone up with a strange look on his face. "Dude, you're not going to believe this," he said, clearly confused. I looked up from my phone. "What's up?" David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just handed me his phone, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. I took it from him, frowning as I looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mom. "She's looking for you," David said. "She called me earlier. Apparently they're in trouble." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't spoken to them in weeks. My mom hadn't even tried to contact me since I left. It was almost like they had written me off. Now, all of a sudden, here she was, reaching out to David of all people. The message on his phone was frantic, full of desperation. "Please, David, I don't know what to do. We're in real trouble. The mortgage payment is overdue, and the electricity is going to get shut off. Michael, please, we need you. We can't keep going like this. We're sorry. We're so sorry. Can you help us?" I stared at the message, my stomach turning. Part of me felt satisfaction. They had laughed when I left. They had thought I would be back, crawling at their feet. But now they were the ones crawling, begging for help. The little bit of support I had given them had been the foundation that had held their financial house of cards together. And now that I was gone, everything was falling apart. "They're in serious trouble, man," David said, his voice low. "It sounds like they've finally realized what they were depending on. I mean, you're the one who's been holding it all together, right?" I nodded slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't what I had expected. I knew they were dependent on me, but I had never thought it would hit them this hard. I was trying to find a balance between feeling vindicated and feeling sad. This wasn't how I had wanted it to go. I didn't want to see them suffer, but I also couldn't ignore how they had treated me all these years. David watched me closely, waiting for a response. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied, my voice quiet. "I feel conflicted. Part of me wants to just tell them to figure it out, that they brought this on themselves. But another part of me, they're still my parents. I don't know if I can just leave them to deal with this alone." David nodded, understanding. "It's complicated, but you've got to set boundaries, man. You've done your part. You've given them enough. But if you're going to help, it has to be on your terms." I knew he was right. I had spent too many years feeling like their bank account. I couldn't go back to that, but maybe there was a way to help without falling back into the same old cycle. After some time, I made my decision. I wasn't going to be their ATM anymore, but I couldn't just leave them hanging either. I called my mom back. It took a few tries before she finally answered. Her voice was shakier than I had ever heard it. "Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything. We didn't mean to hurt you. Please, we need help. I don't know what to do anymore." I took a deep breath, my heart heavy. I had spent weeks thinking about what I would say when this moment came. Now here it was, and I had to make the right decision. "Mom, I'm not coming back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not going to be the one paying your bills again. That's over. But I can help you in other ways. We can look at your finances. I can help you set a budget, help you find ways to cut back on expenses. But it has to be on my terms. No more guilt trips. No more manipulation." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she finally spoke, her voice soft. "I understand. We'll do it your way." And for the first time, I actually believed it. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. The days that followed were filled with a mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt relief. I had finally set a clear boundary, and my mom had actually accepted it. For so many years, I had felt like I was stuck in a loop, constantly sacrificing for them without ever getting anything in return, except for guilt trips and emotional manipulation. But now, I wasn't the one responsible for their mistakes. They would have to figure it out. And for the first time, that felt empowering. On the other hand, the weight of the situation still hung heavy on me. I knew I had made the right decision, but the idea of my parents struggling was hard to swallow. They weren't bad people. They had just been caught up in their own selfishness, using me as a crutch for so long. And now that crutch was gone. I had to wonder, had they ever truly seen me for who I was, or was I always just a means to an end? A few days after my conversation with my mom, I sat down to help them create a budget. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this, but here we were. I thought back to all the years I had paid their bills, never once being asked about my own needs or goals. The tables had turned, and it felt like a small victory, even if it didn't feel like a win in the grand scheme of things. When I finally made the call to sit down with them, my mom was surprisingly cooperative. It wasn't like the old days, when she would argue or shut me out. There was a palpable desperation in her voice now, as if the reality of their situation had finally hit home. "I know we've made mistakes, Michael," she said quietly, as we sat across from each other at their kitchen table. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." And that's when I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't about fixing their financial problems. This was about rebuilding our relationship, in whatever form that might take. It was about setting boundaries, about teaching them to stand on their own 2 feet. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure how it would turn out, but I had to do this. For me, for my peace of mind. We spent hours going over their bills, finding areas to cut back, and brainstorming ways they could bring in extra income. I even suggested they consider refinancing the house to lower the mortgage payments. My mom was quiet for most of it, but I could tell she was listening, processing everything I was saying. And for the first time, it felt like I wasn't just the bank. I was a partner in solving a problem. The real test, though, would come when I had to start setting clear limits. I knew this couldn't be just about financial help. I couldn't fall back into the trap of rescuing them, of feeling like I had to step in whenever they were struggling. A week later, I checked in with my mom. I was cautious, wondering if the guilt trips would start creeping in again. But surprisingly, she was doing better. They had started to follow the budget we had created, and my dad had even started looking for a part-time job to bring in some extra cash. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. Sarah, however, was another story. It didn't take long for me to realize that she hadn't changed at all. She still lived at home, still flitted from one hobby to another, expecting everything to be handed to her. When I asked her about it one evening, her response was typical. "Why should I worry about bills when you're taking care of everything, Mike?" she said, her voice flippant. "You've always been the one with the money." It was infuriating, but at the same time, I couldn't let her drag me back into the cycle. I had to set boundaries with her too. I couldn't let her continue to take advantage of me, and that meant speaking up when she tried to make me feel responsible for her lifestyle. I sat her down one evening, trying to keep my tone calm, even though I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface. "Sarah, I'm not paying your bills anymore," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm not doing it. You need to figure out how to support yourself." She looked at me, shocked. "What? You're just going to leave me to fend for myself?" "Yes, Sarah," I replied, firm. "I'm done being the ATM. You have to grow up and take responsibility." It wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary. My parents had been relying on me for so long, and Sarah had always been exempt from that responsibility. But I couldn't continue to enable that behavior. She needed to learn, just like everyone else, that life doesn't come with a free pass. The tension in the house was palpable for a while after that. Sarah didn't speak to me for days. My parents were walking on eggshells, still adjusting to the new dynamics. But as time passed, something started to shift. Slowly, I saw small changes. My parents were trying to manage their finances better. They weren't perfect, but they were making an effort. And me? I was learning how to stand my ground. I wasn't perfect either. I still had moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. I still missed the old family gatherings, the ones where we'd all sit around the table, laughing and eating, pretending everything was okay. But I knew deep down that things weren't okay before, and that's why I had to leave. In the end, I didn't go back to being their ATM. I didn't let them pull me back into the chaos. But I did help them in a way that was healthier for both of us. It wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It was about taking small steps, about setting boundaries and holding on to my own peace of mind. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, we could have a real Thanksgiving again one day. One where the gratitude was genuine and the love wasn't tied to money. For now, though, I was just taking it day by day, one small step at a time. As weeks turned into months, the weight of the decision I had made started to feel less like a burden and more like the first step toward a new chapter in my life. The emotional roller coaster had been intense, but I was learning to navigate the waters of independence and self-respect. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The first few weeks after my confrontation with my parents were the hardest. There were moments when I would feel a pang of guilt, a voice in my head questioning if I had been too harsh. I loved them. They were my parents after all. But then, I would remind myself that love doesn't mean enabling toxic behavior. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for the sake of someone else's comfort. The hardest part, however, was the loneliness. The house I had once called home felt like a distant memory now, and every time I thought about Thanksgiving or family gatherings, it brought a twinge of sadness. The house was still theirs, but the feeling of warmth and togetherness that used to fill those walls was gone. The holidays no longer had the same meaning. And as much as I tried to tell myself that I had done the right thing, the void of not having a real family to celebrate with was hard to ignore. I spent more time with David and other friends, doing my best to build a new support network that wasn't rooted in financial dependence. They understood, they respected my boundaries, and they were there when I needed them. That was a different kind of family, a family of choice, not obligation. David, especially, was a huge support. He had become my rock during this turbulent time, and our friendship grew even stronger. We would talk late into the night about everything and nothing, and I started to realize that I had so much more to offer the world than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just Michael, the guy who helped pay bills. I was Michael, a person who had dreams, goals, and the right to live my own life, free from the weight of someone else's financial problems. And then, one day, as I was sitting in David's living room, sipping on some coffee and working on a freelance project I'd been putting off, I got a call from my mom. I had expected it for weeks, but when the call finally came, I was a mix of nervousness and caution. "Michael," my mom's voice came through, softer than I'd heard it in a long time. I just wanted to check in on you." I wasn't sure if I should respond immediately or just let the silence sit for a moment, so I waited. "Yeah, I'm doing well, Mom," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "How are things going on your end?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again, her voice laden with something I hadn't expected, humility. "We've been doing better," she said, sounding almost relieved. "We've started following that budget you helped us with, and your dad's been doing some side work to bring in extra cash. It's not perfect, but it's a start." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. I wasn't sure what I had expected her to say, but it certainly wasn't this. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was progress. Real progress. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It's a long road, but it's good to see you both taking steps in the right direction." There was another pause, and then she sighed softly. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done, even though it didn't always seem like it. I know I've asked a lot of you over the years, and I'm sorry for that." The apology, though long overdue, felt like a small victory. It wasn't enough to erase all the hurt from the past, but it was a start. My mom was finally acknowledging what had been broken for so long. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice more sincere than I had expected it to be. "But this isn't about just me. You and Dad need to be able to take care of yourselves. I can help you, but I can't do it all for you." "I understand," she said quietly. "And I'm not asking you to. I just wanted to let you know that I see things differently now. I'm sorry for taking advantage of you." For a moment, I was speechless. It was hard to reconcile this version of my mom with the one who had kicked me out on Thanksgiving, but it was a start. I had set the boundaries, and now they were beginning to respect them. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "That means more to me than you know." We talked a little longer, just catching up. The conversation wasn't easy, and there was still a long way to go. But for the first time in years, it felt like we were talking as equals, not just parent and child, but people trying to rebuild a connection. That night, after I hung up the phone, I felt a quiet sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't going to fix everything overnight, and I wasn't going to go back to being their ATM. But there was hope now, hope that we could slowly rebuild a more honest and respectful relationship. And as for Thanksgiving, I didn't know what the future would hold. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let the past dictate my future. Whether it was with my parents or with the family I was building on my own, I was finally learning that love, respect, and gratitude could be real again, without any strings attached. I wasn't done healing, and neither were they, but we were both on the road to something better. And for now, that was enough. As time passed, the weight of what had happened slowly began to feel more like a distant memory than a constant presence in my life. I had set boundaries with my parents, something I had never done before, and while it had been difficult, it had also been incredibly empowering. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life, my finances, my emotions, and my future. Despite the progress with my parents, there were still moments when the past crept in. On a quiet Sunday afternoon when I was alone in David's apartment, I found myself thinking back to Thanksgiving, to the harsh words, the laughter, and the pain. I thought about the years of financial support I had given them, thinking I was doing it out of love, only to realize that it had been a form of manipulation. I thought about Sarah, still stuck in her bubble, unaware of how hard the world really was. I thought about the emotional toll it had taken on me. But then I reminded myself, I was no longer that person. I was no longer the guy who sacrificed his own dreams for the sake of keeping the peace. I was no longer their ATM, and I wasn't going to be guilted into being anything other than who I was. It wasn't about abandoning them. It was about giving myself the chance to live my own life. As I reflected on everything, I found myself feeling a surprising sense of calm. My life had changed, and although it wasn't perfect, it was better. I had my own space, my own independence, and the freedom to pursue the things that mattered to me. I was slowly but surely working toward my own goals. I had enrolled in a night class to further my career, and I was saving money with the intention of moving into my own place. I no longer had to constantly worry about my parents' financial crises, and I could focus on my own future. Of course, there were moments of sadness. There were days when I missed the idea of a family, the idea of a Thanksgiving dinner surrounded by the warmth of those I loved. But I knew that my family had to come from people who respected me, not just people who saw me as a means to an end. David, too, was always there to remind me that I wasn't alone. He continued to be my sounding board, my confidant, and my friend. He was there when I needed someone to talk to, and he never judged me for the complicated emotions I carried. He understood what it was like to have family issues, and he never once pushed me to reconnect with my parents before I was ready. One evening, a couple of months after that conversation with my mom, I received a message from my sister, Sarah. At first, I hesitated, unsure of what she wanted or if I was ready for another attempt at communication. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. "Hey, Mike, it's Sarah. I know things have been weird between us, but I wanted to say that I'm sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much pressure Mom and Dad put on you, and I know I never really appreciated everything you did for us. I hope we can talk soon. Sarah." Reading her message, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, it felt good to know that she had at least recognized some of the things I'd been going through. On the other hand, I wasn't sure if I was ready to reopen that chapter. I took a deep breath and texted her back. "Thanks for reaching out, Sarah. I appreciate your message. I'm doing well, and I've been focusing on building my own life. I'm not ready for everything to be back to how it was, but maybe we can talk sometime." She responded quickly. "I understand, Mike. I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking of you. Take care of yourself." And that was it. There was no sudden reconciliation, no immediate change, but it was a start. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, things could improve between us in time. Over the next few months, I kept moving forward, one step at a time. I focused on my work, my goals, and most importantly, my mental health. The more I worked on myself, the more I realized that my happiness didn't depend on my parents' approval. It didn't depend on the money I gave them or the sacrifices I made. It depended on me, and that was a powerful realization. Yet despite all of this progress, my relationship with my parents still lingered in the back of my mind. There were times when I thought about them, wondered how they were doing, and occasionally felt the pull to reach out. But each time, I reminded myself of the boundaries I had set, of the necessity of preserving my peace. I had been the one who carried the emotional burden for so long, and now it was time for them to carry their own weight. One evening, as I sat on the couch after another long day, I received a text message from my mom. It wasn't a long message, just a few sentences, but it caught me off guard. "Mike, I just wanted to check in. I'm sorry for how things went down. I miss you. Can we talk sometime?" I stared at the message, my heart beating faster as emotions swirled inside me. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I had spent so much time healing, and the last thing I wanted was to open old wounds. But another part of me felt a strange sense of curiosity. Had they finally realized how wrong they were? Were they truly ready to change? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat with the message for a few hours, thinking about everything that had happened. It was strange, feeling that pull to reconnect, even after all the pain and betrayal. But this time, I wasn't going to do it out of guilt or obligation. I wasn't going to be manipulated again. The next day, I texted her back. "Thanks for reaching out, Mom. I'm doing well. I've been focused on moving forward and figuring out my own life. I'm not ready to jump back into everything, but maybe we can talk soon." Her response came quickly. "I understand, Mike. I know I've made mistakes and I'm really sorry. Whenever you're ready, we're here." That was the extent of the conversation for now. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a step, one that I wasn't sure I was ready for, but I was open to. I had learned that healing doesn't always happen in a straight line. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes it requires taking small, tentative steps forward. I didn't feel pressure to make any big decisions. I wasn't going to let the past define my future, but I also wasn't going to close the door completely. For now, I kept moving forward. My focus was still on building my life, pursuing my goals, and maintaining my independence. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for some kind of future with them, one where boundaries were respected and love was no longer transactional. I spent the next few weeks continuing my work, building my future, and maintaining my new healthy boundaries. Thanksgiving came again, and while I didn't spend it with my parents, I didn't feel the same sting as I had the year before. I had created a new tradition, one that involved friends, laughter, and meaningful connections. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly thankful. I was no longer the person I had been on that fateful Thanksgiving day. I had learned that sometimes, in order to find peace, you have to let go of the past and take control of your own future. And while I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents, I knew that I was finally living life on my own terms. And that, in itself, was enough. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? Share your story in the comments below and let us know how you reclaimed your independence. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories of growth and empowerment.